I want to start off by reading something regarding resilience. And after the stories we've heard this morning, it seems appropriate. It's taken from a book entitled Soul to Soul, which was written by Christine Robinson and Alicia Hawkins, who are both ministers of the First UU Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on resilience. Our lives are a succession of changes, both incremental and disruptive, happy and wretched, and we have to cope, learn, adapt, and let go over and over. You all are a monument to the human ability to cope with change, tragedy, social ills, crisis, growth, happiness, grief, turns of fortune, and a host of other challenges. Our spirituality is a major component of our stress hardiness. Meditation, prayer, and reflection give us practice in valuing our strivings while recognizing that our ultimate values are not at risk. All of us, even though those who feel presently battered by some storm, have ridden the waves of life successfully and resiliently. With a little help from our friends, our faith, and our basic habits of self-care, which are living out our values, asking for help when we need it, and tending to our communities and relationships, we mostly manage to be resilient enough to ride even the big waves of change. A part of all this is our life. Today I'm going to talk about positive words, and the inspiration for this talk is a book called Positive Matters. It's words, quotations, and stories to heal and inspire by Dr. Helen Everard. I'll give you a little background information on Dr. Everard. She was a physician in Pennsylvania who treated mainly patients with asthma and other people with allergies. She was a single mother. She was raising twins, a boy and girl, who were in middle school. She had a beautiful farm in Pennsylvania. She had restored a farmhouse room by room. She had a wonderful practice. It would seem to people that she had everything she needed and everything that could make her life, sufficient. But she was restless and felt that she could do more. She got tired of living in the country. She wanted not to have to drive 30 minutes to see a concert or go to the theater. So she decided she'd make a change. So she sold her farm, she sold her practice, and she moved her twins to Buffalo, New York. Actually, it wasn't even Buffalo, it was an outskirt. It was in the outskirts of Buffalo. She admits that she did this rather impulsively. But one of the reasons why she wanted to move from Pennsylvania was that her twins were in middle school and her son had told her he was gay. And apparently his friends were, well, they weren't his friends, but his classmates were picking on him. He was in physical fights almost daily, and she just wanted to take him out of that environment. So they moved to Buffalo. Well, she bought a rundown practice in Buffalo. She tried to find a suitable home and suitable health care for her family. And when she had set out, she was in her 50s, and she knew it would be a struggle, but she thought she'd be up to the challenge. Well, things didn't work out as planned. She had been lied to about the practice that she bought. She just couldn't seem to get patients to come to her. The health insurer that she had was inadequate for her family. It was all that was available. The house that she purchased was run down, and no matter what she tried, she had a hard time in Buffalo. And as time went on there, she had to use her savings because she really wasn't taking in much of an income. And all the money that she had put aside for retirement went, the money from selling her farm went. She became terribly despondent, and she ended up in a psychiatric ward, basically, for a couple of weeks. And she was she was a smart woman, and she realized that she wasn't getting the help that she needed in that place. So she did have someone looking to get her into an institution, some type of facility that would take care of her and encourage her and try to get her out of her despondency, because by this time she was suicidal. She talked about dying, but she didn't want to do that to her kids. So fortunately, she ended up in a place that encouraged her to be positive, to try to think positively. And one day when she was sitting in the lounge in the hospital, she found a book, and I can find the title for you in a second, but it was about the power of positive words, and it was meditations that were uplifting. And she started reading this book, and it had a profound influence on her. And she decided that she would try to read more and look for positive words. So she started doing that. And before she knew it, she had compiled 80 positive words, and she could have found more, but she took those 80 words, she looked up their meanings. They all had attracted her to them because she could relate to the words in a positive way. And I will hand out those 80 positive words to you. But in the meantime, her, reading her book was really beneficial to me, because when the book came to me, and it did literally and figuratively come to me in the mail, my cousin had sent it to me. Her father had it. He lives in Connecticut, where Dr. Everard now has a practice, because she did leave Buffalo, New York. It wasn't working out for her. So she moved to Connecticut. She found an apartment. She found an apartment on her third try, because her credit rating was so bad that every time she went to Connecticut to look for an apartment, she was turned down, even though she was still a physician. She hadn't worked in 6 months, and she had very little money. But finally, someone rented an apartment to her. And in Connecticut, she was able to start her own practice again. And she wrote this book. And my uncle ended up with this book, and he liked it so much he gave it to his daughter. And I speak to my cousin quite a bit on the phone, and for the last 2 years, we've been commiserating over the last presidential election. And I really have to admit, I was a little down, to say the least, for months. And my cousin Sandy said, I think I have a book for you. And she mailed it to me, and I read it, and it was inspirational. And it made me think of my own need to find some positive words. So after reading the book, I decided to make a list, and I've come up with 50 words, not 80, but I like my words, and I tried to find words that were not the same as Helen Everard's. And a couple of words, you probably can figure out why I chose them. One of the words is spectacular, and that relates to Steve's latest
diagnosis.
PET scan, diagnosis. We went to the oncologist together, and the doctor was beaming, and she said, the results of your latest tests were spectacular. And I thought, yeah, that's the word. It's going on my list. And and another word I picked was non-flammable. Because my wonderful husband has been pointing out to me that, my anger and disappointment over the last election is just, too much. So you've got to let it go. And, what they say about redheads, they're excitable in front of anger. Well, he got tired of watching the NewsHour on PBS with me because I just couldn't shut up. And he just wanted to hear the news. So, yeah. So non-flammable. It's not only your clothing that catches on fire, it can be your feelings. So I've decided that non-flammable goes on the list too. Steve's going to hand out my words first, and then we'll do Helen's. So, yeah. It's the top list, top pile.
You make an alphabet, so we'll hide it.
Well, I was expecting a small group, so I did 35. So we'll see how close I came.
I speak for 1 second.
Sure.
These are only written and not typed because our computer decided we started for like that for me. Something about that too.
Right, then
I sit here and watch this straight and hey, I just did read a lot of listen to right about the listening. Like that's what really happened. But not maybe it's still what always traveling back.
Well, he's distributing my words. I came across a proverb which I thought was suitable. A word to the wise is sufficient. I like that word sufficient. I didn't put it down on my list, but I was a little surprised that Dr. Everard did not put it on her list. Because if she had stayed in Pennsylvania, and looked at her life a little bit differently, she might have seen that her life was sufficient. But sometimes we're just not happy with the status quo. And there's nothing wrong with adventures, that's for sure. But she looks back on her life in this book, and she doesn't regret anything, which is, I think, a good way to be if you're going to remain positive. You've just got to move forward. But she realizes that if she had taken a little longer to look at her situation, she might have realized that her life was sufficient in Pennsylvania. She might have had to work harder to protect her son. But when she got to the Buffalo, New York area, she was surprised that a lot of the problems that they had in Pennsylvania were problems in Buffalo, New York. So, anyway.
You
Are there any words on my list that you would like me to talk about or wonder why I chose them?
Stalwart.
Stalwart. I'm glad you asked about that one. Because after reading the book and when I was first looking for positive words and things that I was reading, I came across an essay. It was called A Letter from Utah by Catherine Schultz. And the title of the article was Food Fight. It's from the New Yorker, the October 1st issue. And it's a restaurant campaign to save the wilderness. And it's about two women who opened a restaurant in Utah near the Escalante National Monument. And you probably know what's been going on there, but this administration is, taking some land that is in our national parks and trying to use it for, use the resources in the parks for a variety of things. But these two women were not from the area. They were not from Utah. I forget where they were from. But they decided to open a restaurant. And they were very successful with the restaurant for many, many years. But then when things started changing in the nearby National Monument, the number of tourists started to dwindle. And they were afraid of losing their restaurant. So they decided to become political. And neither one of these women had ever been involved in politics before, but they decided to fight for the environment. And the story was about these two women, and I just thought they were amazing. And out of the blue, the word stalwart came into my head, and it was the best way, I think, to describe these two women. And the dictionary about that word, stalwart means strongly built, sturdy, courageous, resolute, determined, brave, daring, intrepid, valiant, spirited, steadfast, tenacious, plucky, lion-hearted, audacious, and persistent. And there's my, those words, some of them made my list,
See, your husband.
And my husband, stalwart. Yeah. That was very apropos. Any other words?
Acceptance.
Acceptance, yes. That was a word that I found when I was reading that appealed to me because it's obviously positive. Everyone hopes to be accepted. It's the act It's a noun, the act or process of accepting, the state of being accepted or acceptable. And, we try here to be acceptable of everyone who walks through our doors. So I just thought it was a good positive word. And as a matter of fact, that word acceptance is in our principles. There are actually 11 words on the list that come from our principles. You might spot a few here. But I'll tell you what they are. They are community, compassion, dignity, encouragement, growth, justice, meaning, and peace, and respect. And the last one is worth. And I found all those words when I was reading, and it wasn't until afterwards, after I jotted them down, that I realized they were in our principles. So that was just a nice coincidence. Okay, Steve will hand out Helen Everard's words, and I will read from the book the ones that really captured me.
You guys use a double to each. Because way back to the part.
On the back end, I just the tears you the camera. These now are this is yeah.
There's another word on my list that's ameliorative, and I had a wonderful teacher in high school who talked about the power of words and how they could be neutral, or they could be ameliorative or pejorative. And ameliorative or ameliorative means, making better, being more uplifting. If a word is ameliorative, it's a positive word. And I was just thinking, without becoming flammable, that wouldn't it be nice if every morning our president tweeted with ameliorative words instead of pejorative words? And I didn't include pejorative because it's a negative word, but or even neutral words at this point would be nice. Just give us the facts. Just the facts.
Sweet.
This is what Helen has to say about tolerance. The definition: the power or capacity of enduring, the endurance of the presence or actions of objectionable persons or of the expression of offensive opinions. And she devotes 2 pages to each of the words on her 80-word list. I really recommend this book because it's just beautifully put together. She gives the definition, then the etymology of the word, then she gives quotations. The quotations are fantastic. One of the quotations for tolerance is, "In the practice of tolerance, one's enemy is the best teacher." And that was said by the Dalai Lama. Helen Hayes said, "When traveling with someone, take large doses of patience and tolerance with your morning coffee.
That's not enough.
Excellent.
And then at the end of the 2 pages devoted to each word, she writes from her own personal experience what the word means to her. This word is so very dear to my heart because I have a gay son. Long before the phenomenon of bullying achieved national prominence, I wrung my hands in anguish as he endured various forms of physical and verbal abuse in middle school. This was among the reasons I left Pennsylvania and started a new endeavor in Buffalo, not knowing that this decision would have very dire consequences for us all. But I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Fortunately, I was able to provide him and his sister with a first-rate and safe high school experience. As my world collapsed, I was also able to discover my own inner strength and resilience. All 3 of us weathered the storm we endured, and as far as I can tell, we're all the better because of it. The second word that I choose to talk about is the word accept. The definition is to receive with a consenting mind something offered, to assent to approve, to acknowledge, to understand, to take upon oneself a responsibility or a liability. And, a quote she uses is from Martin Luther King Jr. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. When things go wrong, we can often take on a posture of resistance or denial. In my case, I found it virtually impossible to accept the fact that I had lost everything I'd built with my own hands. I spent all my energy trying to fight the unfairness, the lies, and deceit that surrounded me, believing it was my duty to resist the nefarious powers that seemed to conspire against me. During my first group session in the psychiatric hospital, a therapist reminded us in no uncertain terms that life isn't fair. Magically, once I accepted this, things got a lot easier. As I said yes to my situation, my expectations shifted. This simple act of acquiescence allowed me to move out from under the rock where I was hiding and to view my life in a new and different way. The third, I'm only going to do 6 of these, because I'd like to read them all, but we just don't have time. So the third one is the word advance. The definition: to move forward, to make, to go on, to help on, to bring to view or notice. Improvement or progression, physically, mentally, morally, or socially. The first step toward the attainment of a result. And this is what Helen has to say about the word advance. I lived in a world of advances when I was practicing medicine. Part of my job was to keep up with the latest treatment for allergies, the most recent test or scan, the newest breakthrough in asthma. Over time, I learned that I could help people just as well by using older, tried and true methods, that those current recommendations by the expert of the day were not necessarily better. I certainly had to revisit this word when life as I knew it came to a grinding halt. I was dead in the water. The word became a verb instead of a noun. At that point, I had to advance, all by myself, in a deliberate and painstakingly slow fashion. but each of us possesses this capability. We can indeed take the first step toward a better day. The future is waiting for us. The next word is succeed.
That's good.
To succeed, to obtain the object desired, to accomplish what is attempted or intended, to fall heir to come after, to follow. Helen said, my adult world appeared outwardly successful, but underneath no one was aware of the terrible sense of failure that colored my days. Those feelings of worthlessness, guilt, inadequacy, my constant traveling companions, the hallmarks of a depressed mind, seemed impossible to conquer. I then succeeded in losing everything I thought was important to me. What followed, though, was a new and much healthier outlook on life. I'm succeeding now because I am accomplishing what I'm attempting to do, which is to be grateful for what I have and to be forgiving, respectful, and loving to others. In striving to triumph in some very tough times, I'm finding the peace that follows. And the fifth word, tenacity. Definition: the quality or fact of being able to grip something firmly. The quality or fact of being very determined. Determination, the quality or fact of continuing to exist and persistence. This was a somewhat funny anecdote. There was a lawyer in Buffalo who bombarded cable TV with advertisements about his services. His claim to fame was that he was tenacious for his clients. Somehow this prompted me to visit this word. It took a lot of tenacity for me to emerge from a very dark place and begin to move forward. Tenacity and strength were what got me started. We each possess this quality to some degree. We need to call it up into our consciousness when needed, to remind ourselves that we determine our own fate. We have to be both persistent and consistent in our efforts to turn things around. I actually called that lawyer when everything went sour and I needed legal advice. But he had no interest in being tenacious for me. Luckily, that didn't sour me on the merits of this word. And the last one is sustain. And at this time, her twins were graduating from high school. They were 18. This word is so heavy with intense significance for me that it's hard to even reflect on it. It brings up painful memories of my time in the psych ward when my depression was at its very worst, at which point I had to dig deep inside and ask myself what was sustaining me, what was keeping me alive. I wanted to be dead, absolutely, but not by my own hand. I know that the unconditional love of my son was the force that held my head above water, the love of an 18-year-old young man who watched his mother lose everything, but who never judged me, never blamed me, who always stood by my side. As I slowly got better, I realized he provided me with an invaluable life lesson in forgiveness, compassion, and forbearance. Child teaching mother, you bet. A miraculous event for which I am eternally grateful. So, that is all I'm going to read to you from there. But I'd like to read to you a poem. I'll end with this poem. It's called The Guest House by Rumi. For those of you who are not familiar with Rumi, the Persians and Afghanis call Rumi, and I'm probably not saying this correctly, but Jalaluddin Balkhi. He was born September 30th, 1207, in Balkh, Afghanistan, which was then part of the Persian Empire. The title of the poem is The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.